So today we are going to be looking at what is economics, what's scarcity, and some of our other foundational concepts to the field of economics. Okay. So first up, we're going to look at some different definitions about what economics is and kind of sum up our overall idea of what are we studying when we're studying economics. So there's often a lot of confusion about that. So first definition we have is the study of people producing and exchanging goods and services they want. Okay. Our second definition is the science that studies allocation of scarce resources among its unlimited wants and needs. And our third definition is actually from your textbook. It says the study of how people seek to satisfy their needs and wants by making choices. Let's take a look at some of the things that are in common between these definitions. We have the fact that they're studying in each of them. We have this idea of people in several of them. We have this idea of wants and needs, goods and services. Those are kind of similar, not exactly the same, but related. With wants and needs and resources of goods and services. And we have this idea of we're studying, the allocation, the exchange, how we are making our choices. Okay, so exchanging, there's like a change, an exchange, a movement between different things. Allocation is a fancy word for distribution, so it's kind of along those same lines. And then we're seeing how people are making choices. So there's this movement, this decision that we have to make about what we're doing with our resources that are limited in all of these definitions. And we're looking at people because social science, so we're going through the scientific method and we're figuring out how people are doing all this. Okay, so think about what would be a good word to summarize what's going on for all of economics. When we compare these different definitions, we're going to sum it up in one word. Economics is all about choices, right? It's all about the decisions you make. So we're constantly making choices. We make choices about what we eat for lunch. We make choices about whether or not we're working on our assignments, about whether or not we're working at a job. We're constantly making choices. There's tons of choices we make every single day. So economics is a very relevant subject for all of us to be studying, right? And our next kind of sets of concepts we're going to look at and compare is this idea of scarcity versus shortage. So as we are looking at scarcity versus shortage, both of them have to do with this idea of limits, right? So both scarcity and shortage are a limitation of our resources. So we're going to look at a couple examples here to kind of figure out whether or not we're seeing a limitation that's scarcity or a limitation that really fits the definition of shortage. So even though they're both limits in our resources, they're not the same concept. It's really important you understand the difference between scarcity and shortage. Okay, so first thing we got to do is we got to figure out what resource is limited in these examples. So we have chairs in the game musical chairs, and a lot of us are very familiar with the game musical chairs, right? Where you have In this case, we have 3 chairs, so you'd have 4 people that would be circling around during the music. Music stops, and there's only spaces for 3 of them to sit down. You'd take the chair away, and then you'd have 2 chairs, and you'd go around. You'd have 3 people, and then eventually you end up with 1 winner, right? So our limited resource here is the chairs, right, inside the game of musical chairs. And then our second example, we need to complete 2 research essays that take us 4 hours each to do. We have 2 projects that are going to take us 5 hours each to do. We have 3 review packets that are going to take 3 hours each to do. Sounds like kind of an end of semester workload, maybe in college or something, right? So in this case, what we're limited in is our time. It's these hours, right? We are limited in the number of hours we have each day. All of us have only 24 hours in a day to get things done, right? So as we are looking at that, then we're limited in our hours. So we're looking at the difference between scarcity and shortage. For shortage, we're only limited for a certain period of time, right? The resource is going to be able to be replenished relatively quickly. Sometimes shortages can take longer than others. We're in 2020 where we have definitely some shortages that are taking longer in stores to come back, but it's still limited in time. The resources exist, but they're not here right now when we want them, right? And then we have this idea of scarcity where your resources are just limited, and it doesn't matter if you wait longer. You're never going to be able to replenish that resource to the fullest extent that you want, right? So when we're looking at these chairs versus time, you're trying to sort out which is scarce and which is a shortage. We have a shortage in the game of musical chairs of our chairs, right? Inside the game, we have a limitation on chairs. But most of the time you play the game, there are more chairs even in that same room. They're just pushed to the side. People who are out are probably sitting in some of the chairs that are also not being used during the game. So that would be easy to replenish the number of chairs. It's not really a shortage. It's not really scarce in that case. It's just a temporary shortage that's the point of the game, right? There's a shortage of chairs. Whereas when we look at our time during the day, that is scarce. We can't go back and use time differently than how we've already spent it, right? So our time is scarce. Nobody can get more time than the 24 hours in a day that they have, right? So we have the difference between shortage, and our example for that in this case is chairs in the game of musical chairs, and scarcity, which our example is time, right? But tons of other things are scarce. We have a scarce amount of land. There's only a certain amount. You can't get more land, of fresh water, of clean air, of different other kinds of natural resources like oil and natural gas. But really, economists would say everything is scarce, right? There's a limit to how much you can make of anything, right? Now we're going to look at needs versus wants. We're looking at our needs, right? These are things that we literally have to have in order to survive. You will literally die without having the needs. The wants are the things where you really desire them and they make life awesome, but you will not literally die if you don't have them, right? So we have a series of examples for our needs and our wants. We look about our needs. We need food, right? Which could be represented by the bread, the cow. We have a house. If you think about the house representing shelter, we need shelter. When we look at our other things, entertainment, sports, it's more of a want. We desire these things. We will not literally die without them. Traveling, that's a want, right? We desire to travel. We don't need to travel on vacations. And then even things like technology, computers, internet, cell phones, those are actually wants. People have survived for centuries without such things. Now, we want them desperately, and they definitely are important in our society, but we will not literally die without those things. Right? So needs versus goods versus services, same kind of thing. Looking at goods, goods are actual tangible objects that you can touch that are being sold and being purchased. So we have, the food and the toaster. That's a good. You could actually touch your alarm clock, soccer ball, and when you look at services, these are things that other people are doing for you. So a doctor, they're performing a service, giving medical care. She looks like she's doing some kind of data entry. She's doing some kind of service. Getting a tow, that's a service. And then you have a bus here, and we have a kind of forklift. So these ones, depending on how you look at them, they could represent a good or a service, right? And it really kind of depends on how you're doing it. The bus driver is performing a service. The bus itself is a good. And the same thing with your forklift here. The driver is performing a service. The item itself is a good. As far as the picture examples, it really just depends on how you're looking at it, right? They could represent either. And we have our factors of production. There's 3 factors of production that we talk about. First one is land, okay? So land includes the actual physical space that you have, right? Whatever that actual space is part of what we're talking about for land. But it's not the only thing that we mean as economists by land. It also includes everything you get naturally from the land. So is the land good for farming? If it is, that is part of the factor production, what we sum up in the word land. Does it have, fresh water? That is part of what we mean by land. Does it have animals, whether they're domesticated animals or whether they're wild animals? That's part of land. So anything, including the physical space and anything we get naturally from the environment, any kind of natural resource, even things like oil, natural gas, minerals, those kinds of things, all of those are all summed up in the word land when we refer to it in economics. Then we have labor. I like to summarize labor as your blood, sweat, and tears, hopefully not literally, but it's anything that you do or anybody does that is putting forth effort for work, okay? So whether you're a welder, whether you're a vet, whether you're a business person, or whether you're working at home as a business person, whatever that is, that you're doing for labor, that for work is your labor, right? Then we have this idea of capital, okay? And we have physical capital and we have human capital. It divides into 2 different parts for capital, right? Capital in general, it's anything we create as humans that we use in production, okay? So on that note, okay, this is important. Money is not capital, okay? Money is something else in economics, and we will talk about money later on in the course, but it is not capital. Whatever you spend the money on is probably capital. It has to be an actual tool that we use in order to produce things. You don't use money to create a product. You spend it and you use those tools to create a product, okay? I know there's a little semantics there, but it's important, okay? Money is not an example of capital. What you spend the money on probably is, and that's the case for a lot of examples, right? Money is not really a good example for most things that we're talking about in economics. We're looking at the resources behind what you're spending money on, okay? So physical capital is things that you can actually physically touch. So when we look about here, computers, right? We can physically touch. The literal tools we can touch. The actual, whether it's an ambulance or whether it's, company truck, things like that, those you can do. Whether it's a factory or whether it's just a building, whether it's a school building or an office building, those things are physical capital, right? All of those things are used, generally speaking, in production. We have this idea of human capital, right? And that is our knowledge and our skills. It's our knowledge and our skills, our experience. So, an eye doctor, they have a lot of learning that they've done in their education in order to do that. So the education you're doing right now builds up your human capital. That's what interviewers, that's what they're trying to figure out, is how strong is your human capital, and whether or not you get the job usually has to do with how well you express what your human capital is. So it's both your knowledge of what you've learned in school and your experience, right? Your time on the job, those skills. Think about it. Even in a job that's considered, often a first job, very basic of sorts, right? Think about your going to the grocery store, okay? Can you tell the difference between someone who's their first day on the job and somebody that's been working that job for a year? Yeah, you can tell the difference, right? There's nothing wrong with the person who's first day on the job, but you can tell that it's their first day. They don't remember where the code is for bananas. Somebody that's working on it for a year, they have it memorized. They don't even have to look it up, right? So that's human capital. That's why your experience matters. That's why your knowledge from school matters. Okay, so our knowledge, skills, and experience are all part of human capital. So entrepreneur is not a factor of production, but it is important in the factors of production. What entrepreneurs do is they combine these three factors of production, land, labor, capital, and they use those to make new goods and services, right? They're the people that come up with the idea, okay?